video, we're going to walk through the installation process for the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator Kit on the 2024 newer Triumph Speed 400. And before we get to the install process, let's quickly review some of the key features of the Vagabond kit for the Speed 400. The Fender Eliminator body is proudly manufactured here in the United States from a single sheet of CNC laser cut and CNC formed aluminum, finished in UV resistant satin black powder coat. The design of the Fender Eliminator kit is got this strange kind of contouring around the whole top of the Fender Eliminator body, and that's because we laser scan every motorcycle that we design a part for, and we really go through the details in the CAD modeling to make sure it fits perfectly in that kind of pocket that the factory fender leaves when you remove it. It's a fully plug and play kit so that the OEM lights are going to bolt right into this with no modifications needed, so you're not going to be doing any wire splicing or cutting. And we supply, outside of some hardware that we kind of reuse from the factory fender, we supply all the hardware you need. So you're going to get a pair of stainless steel button head cap screws, metric M6s, and then a pair of spacers, a pair of lock washers, a pair of flat washers, a pair of rubber bumpers for the license plate flange to minimize license plate buzzing or long-term cracking, and a rubber grommet for the kind of central wire pass-through hole to minimize any sort of wire chafing in the long term. Now, this is a pretty easy installation process, and the tools you'll need will be a 4 and a 5mm Allen key or a hex head metric wrench. They seem to be in kind of bits or sockets like this, or just like the standard L keys. It doesn't really matter which ones you've got. 4 to 5mm, an 8 and a 10mm hex head socket, and essentially ratchet to go with that, and a Phillips head screwdriver. Now, to get the installation started, we're going to remove the rider seat using the key and the shifter side latch. Next step is we're going to disconnect this 4-pin electrical connector, which carries the turn signals and the license plate light power. That is a lift, the little tab with your finger or pick to release it. Next, we're going to remove the rear fender by removing these 4 5mm head button head Allen bolts. Now, when you get that last bolt out, the rear ones are in bushing, so they may not drop out necessarily. Keep that fender in your hand and kind of guide the last little bit of the harness out of the hole. Set to the side, we'll break it down. Once you got the fender off the bike, a couple things to note. We are actually, these two, the shorter of the 2 shoulder bolts, we're actually going to reuse in the Fender Eliminator installation. So set those aside, keep track of them. The other ones are not going to get reused. You can set them aside with the rest of the factory fender parts. Every fender coming from the dealer is probably going to have slightly different hardware. Remove your license plate, and whatever hardware it comes with, that'll get reused on the Fender Eliminator. And then we'll get into splitting the fender. So if we flip the fender upside down here, there's going to be 3 4mm Allens. So take your 4mm I'm talking about hardware. None of this other hardware is going to get reused, so it's useful to set aside just in case you have to put factory fender back on for some reason. But we're not going to need them from the Fender Eliminator. So after the 4mm, you're going to take the 8mm socket, and you're going to pop off the reflector. That actually holds 2 pieces of the fender together. And then last, you're going to take your, actually not last, next you're going to take your 10mm socket, and now last you're going to get your 5mm Allen key again. You're actually going to remove the turn signals because those actually help hold 2 pieces of the fender together. You don't have to worry about electrical, and you are going to reuse the turn signal bolts. Once you got all the bolts and nuts out of the fender, it's all held together by these 2 rubber grommets that you can kind of peel the whole thing apart and pop them out, or you can just push them out now. It'll make the disassembly a little easier. These aren't going to get reused, but they're much easier to, rather than to pull them out, to push them out. So just go back to the top side and either using a screwdriver or a pick, or you can do it by hand if you want, push those grommets through. And then once those are out, the fender should come apart into its two halves. And once you got the fender shells apart, you can actually fully remove the turn signals. They have little JST connectors that you do push the tabs down on to release. Set those aside. And now we're left with the wiring harness, which we are again going to reuse. And there are these tiny Phillips head screws holding on the plastic P-clips. And to pull the harness out of this fender, we're going to have to remove those. So there should be 5 of them total. And we'll review everything needed once you're done here. So we got the harness loose, and you can see these P-clips we're not going to reuse, so I wouldn't break them necessarily, but you slide them off over the wiring harness. And then the last bit that we want to take from here is the license plate light. So where these screws are actually a very small Phillips head, you probably can use the same screwdriver for both, but this is more of a standard Phillips head. So 2 more Phillips head screws in the license plate light, and we are going to have to disconnect this red connector. That is you can push, or if you're, sometimes easier to just lift on the tab to remove it. Okay, so just to be clear about what we're going to take from the factory fender, you're going to take that kind of intermediate wiring harness out. You're going to take the license plate light out with its 2 plastic like thread cutting screws. So those are going to come with the both factory turn signals and their M6 bolts. Those are going to come with. And then finally, as mentioned previously, the 2 of the 4, the shorter of the 2 fender mounting bolts, we're actually going to reuse in the fender eliminator. Now we can get into assembling the fender eliminator body, and at this point it's probably easiest to start with the supplied grommet. You can go ahead and just install it. We're not passing huge wiring connectors through, so you can go ahead and install that grommet before we really even get started with the lighting install. And while we're here, you can also install the 2 rubber bumpers that are supplied in the hardware kit with the fender eliminator. Go and put those in the 2 circular holes at the bottom of the license plate flange. Next, I would start with the license plate light. So grab the factory license plate light. It does have a little bump as part of that light that you're going to need to make sure it kind of fits into that little keyhole on the fender eliminator. So pass the connector through the bigger part of the keyhole, slide it through, make sure that little rubber boot sits flush when you hold it together. And by eye, you're going to want to kind of line up the 2 screw holes and use a Phillips head screwdriver to tighten up the license plate light. And before you get super tight, I would go snug and then flip it back around. We still have a tiny bit of time to straighten it out by eye. It's going to be the easiest way to tell if you're nicely aligned. And then go hand tight. You could very well strip these out, so there's no point in going super tight. At that point you can actually pass that red connector through the center grommet. Now we're going to move on to turn signals. And the turn signals look identical except for one's got a white connector and one's got a black connector. The white is going to be, if you're staring at the rear of the motorcycle, your right turn signal. And so the things to note here are that the side of the Fender Eliminator, excuse me, it's got this kind of D-shaped cutout and an M6 threaded insert already pressed in. So you're going to pass the electrical connector through that threaded insert, or through that D-shaped hole, and then you're going to reuse the factory screw, which is just a standard M6 sockethead cap screw. And you can use your 5mm Allen key to tighten that one up. And that's got a full, there shouldn't be a lot of play, there should be only the tiniest amount. So it should be extremely flush to the side of the Fender Eliminator flange. So once you've got it all together, make sure there's no gaps or nothing stuck, you can tighten that one quite a bit. We'll move on to the left side. Same deal, electrical connector and that kind of metal stud goes through, or the metal pilot boss goes through, and then the socketed cap screw goes into the threaded insert. 5mm. So once those are nice and tight, really the only thing left to do is connect some wiring. And I would recommend doing this now as opposed to on the motorcycle. You technically could do it a little bit later. From the top side, pass your turn signal connectors down through the grommet, and you don't need a lot, so that when you flip them Fender Eliminator back upside down, all you have to do is connect the two small JST connectors, and you can pull some of the slack back out of the loom that you just connected. What I would do personally is carry a little bit of slack, because you don't need to pull on these connectors. And if you really want to, these are technically sealed. They have a small gasket in each one. You very well could either heat shrink these with non-adhesive heat shrink, or give them like electrical tape or wrap of electrical tape if you wanted to. It's not required, and it's not included in the kit. But that, at this point, the Fender Eliminator assembly is ready to go back on the motorcycle. And before we slap this thing onto the motorcycle, I did notice I missed the intermediate license plate light connector, so connect those two. This whole wiring loom is going to just get fed up through the rectangular hole on the tail section of the motorcycle during install. For hardware, we're going to reuse, as mentioned, the shorter of the two shoulder bolts with their washers. So those are going to go in the back two holes. Oops. Those are actually going to go through factory rubber bushings, so they're going to get kind of squeezed and a little bit easier to install as like the last bit. So I wouldn't start the installation with those two rear ones. What I would do is take the supplied new hardware. So these are the M6 button heads and the split lock washer and their flat washers. Those are going to go in the front two holes, and they're going to go up through the kind of larger holes in the undertail plastics, and you're actually going to run the supplied split lock spacers, or split spacers, excuse me, not lock spacers. They're going to go up through those kind of bigger holes, and they're going to allow the Fender Eliminator to bolt metal to metal, as opposed to like squeezing the heck out of the undertail plastics, which usually makes them crack over time. So when you go to install, as I kind of have right now, keep one hand kind of holding those two fasteners up, and so the other hand can kind of feed up the wiring harness, and then it makes it really easy to start with these two front fastener stacks, and then we'll put the rear ones in second. Yeah, so when we go for the install, like I mentioned, you want to start with kind of one hand pushing up your two front bolts, and then put those two spacers on. Before we go to tighten them, start by kind of pushing up your electrical loom through that hole. So we'll get that going. Then you can get on one of the two bolts, put a tool to start it, kind of get it a couple threads in, move on over to the neighboring bolt. So then once you've got the front two, you're going to take those shoulder bolts with your 5mm and install the rear. Once you get everything hand tight, you can switch on over to a wrench and tighten them until you'll definitely feel the shoulder bolts and the front ones, to be honest, bottom out. So it's not like you have to worry about knowing when you're fully tight. You'll actually feel that shoulder. And bottom into the subframe, and so past that, just good and snug with hand tight. No need to use power tools, or I wouldn't necessarily suggest pulling a torque wrench out for this either. And when you're down here, something you can do is make sure you have enough, but not too much slack in your cables, so you're not like pulling too tight on any one thing. And then we'll go up top side and finish the installation. But at this point, you can already see kind of how the Fender Eliminator really kind of fits into all the kind of pockets of the undertail of the motorcycle. Now back topside, all you really have to do is you're gonna have a fair amount of longer or extra cable loom or wiring loom at this point, just because we took so much out of the fender. But there's that one 4-pin connector. It's got a little tooth up top that helps you know which direction to align it to. It's a little awkward, but kind of snake it around, push it in until you hear a click, and then really all you have to do is make a pretty small service loop of the additional, like the extra wiring, and that can either go back that way, it can go around with the other wiring. It's pretty easy to tidy up. Then once that's done, you just have to reinstall your seat. That's it. Now once you're all buttoned up, I highly recommend you do a quick systems check, make sure all your lights work, turn signals are going the direction they're meant to go. So left, right, hazards, and for sure check your brake lights to make sure nothing has been damaged in that install. Now with that, the installation is complete. You have a couple walk around views of the installed product. You can see kind of how the turn signals and license plate lights really tuck into the undertail of the factory bodywork for a super clean kind of OEM appearance. With that, I'd like to say thank you for watching this video. Our products can be found at www.vagabondmotorsports.com. Thank you.